evening and welcome to Building Better Communities, hosted by Knock at Midnight. Reverend Banks will not be here tonight or next week. He's on vacation, getting ready for the beginning of the school year for CPS. I'm going to be on tonight. My name is Philip Bradley. I'm the president of Nonviolent Works. I'm also associated with two other individuals, part of my organization. One is Dr. Alfredi Weedham and Larry Campbell, who is my treasurer, and Dr. Weedham is my VP, vice president. We've been talking for the last several weeks, trying to educate the public, because one of the things that I'm familiar with is public education, character development, and nonviolence. And for over 20 years, I did have a show on cable access called Common Sense, and we talked about political, economic, educational, and how do you change the way things are going in the personal as well as in your social. So we've been talking for the last several weeks about the 8 steps of nonviolence. How do they apply to you, and how do you apply them to a social problem? And so we started off with, for those who did not know, is that it's actually 8 steps to it. It's 8 steps to nonviolence. It's not 6, it's not 4, it's not 3, it's not 1. It's 8 steps. You can call it a logic model. It's a logical series of events that has to happen for violence not to happen. Because violence itself is illogical. Violence has no steps. Violence just pop off. It's 0 to 100 real fast. It has no rhyme or reason, and has no end in sight when you're dealing with certain policies or programs. But you can stop it or solve it in your personal or social if you know the steps. And so we've been trying to educate the Chicago area around these steps because, as you know, violence have taken a toll on all of us. We, as a citizenry, have been under attack spiritually, mentally, emotionally, and physically. But if you don't know certain steps, you can't solve or stop the problem. So we started with observation, step 1. So when you look at the whole notion of the 8 steps of nonviolence, it's 8 steps: observation, investigation, purification, recommendation, education, demonstration, confrontation, reconciliation. So even within the framework of the 8 steps, confrontation is a step, but it's the 7th step. It's not the first thing you do. It's not the second thing you do. It's not the third thing you do. It's the 7th thing you would be involved in before you get to the 8th step, which is how do you reconcile the problem in spite of the confrontation. And so nonviolence has it start with I see something with the point to solve the problem. And so tonight we're going to talk about step 4, recommendation. How do you give a scientific recommendation or a comprehensive recommendation or a preventive recommendation or a logical recommendation that can solve the problem? And many times we as the citizen don't make such recommendations. We either have outbursts, anger, mad, want to join a lynching, join a mob, join a crowd, but we don't understand how to join a community and a congregation of people who have to think through the process of reconciliation and then the policies that you need to put in place so that you can institutionalize what your answers are that are above the board, honest, and just, and everyone will benefit from it if we just all can come together and reason together. But it will take a non-violent thinking apparatus to do it. So tonight we're talking about step 4. Step 1, observation. You must see something accurately, look at it. You have to have seen it. You have to have looked at it and studied it yourself. Don't worry about what other people say. Gossip, hearsay, and rumor cannot help you solve a problem. You cannot go by what other people say about what they saw. The question is, what did you see? And you always need to value your own integrity and your own intelligence for the most part. Many people may question what you see or what you think, and many times you may be very accurate, but you have to have the courage to stand on it and then understand that you have the right to make the observation. People can't tell you you don't have the right to see it. So if something happened, you have a right to report it. It is your right to report it. It is within the boundaries
Proceed
of
to the route.
citizenship to report it. And so observation is step one to bringing about any means of social order. Because if people don't see it, you can't stop it. So if there's lynchings going on and we were so afraid to say we saw it, you can't stop that. If domestic violence is going on and you're too afraid to say you saw it, you can't stop that. If child abuse is going on and you're too afraid to say you saw it, you can't stop that. If people being violated is going on, called bullying, and you're too afraid to say you saw it, you can't stop that. If the police is killing the citizen or the citizen's killing the police and you're too afraid to say you saw it, well, you can't stop that. If the state is killing the citizen and you're too afraid to speak up about it, call capital punishment, you can't stop that. If there's unlawful wars and unconstitutional wars being waged around the world by our own government, and you don't say you saw it, well, you can't stop that. And if people being just killed with countlessly and without any consideration of their value, called genocide, and if you don't never make acknowledgement of it like you see it, uh, you can't stop it. And so the first step to stopping violence in all its forms is to make an observation that you saw it. And that's when the syndrome begins to be examined. Because then it goes to step two called an investigation, asking a series of logical, scientific questions that deal with the history of the problem, the laws that govern the problem, and the science of correction called investigation. So now you can investigate, what am I looking at? What is this? How long has this been going on? Who all is suffering from this problem? If we don't solve the problem, what else can happen if the problem is not solved? And it's asking these logical, rational questions that give you then the insight to yourself on, okay, why you now want to solve the problem? Step three, you just trying to get even with people? Are you seeking revenge? Are you doing it because you're afraid? You say you're doing this because it's right. So you have to check your correct motive and be correctly motivated and get out hurt feelings, being the victim, so you can deal with correct advancement of a logical step four recommendations, which means you have to have seen it, ask a logical questions yourself, and then work on your own motivation why you want to solve the problem, where you come to some resolution other than stone them, kill them, I hate them, I don't like them. Well, your best recommendation can't solve this problem. You have to undo all of that to come up with an answer by which we can live with that will at least help solve the problem. So recommendations is just that. It's the fourth step of you seeing something, asking a series of logical questions about what you're seeing to your satisfaction. It's not just asking the question; it's getting your questions answered. It's getting the information necessary so you can make an intelligent choice about what you're going to do. And so that's the part of that violence don't allow us to do. Violence say don't say you saw it. Violence say don't ask questions. Violence say get your feelings out of the way. And violence say don't recommend solving the problem. And so because we've only been taught violence, and all we've seen is violence, all we have been incorporated is violence, and what we have bought into is violence. Well, violence presently is winning from that standpoint because that's all the victim knows and that's all the villain knows. The question is, do the citizenry of the city of Chicago know anything about nonviolence? Because if you don't know it, you can't do it. And if you can't do it, you can't manifest it. And if you can't manifest it, your children can't be the benefactors from it. And so we have to go back to just square one. What is nonviolence? What's the history of it? What's the laws that govern it? And what's the science of how you implement it in your personal life and in your social life? Because we do have a history of nonviolence being used within the American construct that they call it the Nonviolent Direct Action Movement. Dr. King was the chairperson of that. James Bevel was one of the lieutenants in that. There was Fannie Lou Hamer. There was numerous people, Dorothy Tillman. There was people who, Andy Young, John Lewis, Marion Barry, numerous great souls who went on into political life and social dynamics after that event. But they freed enough of us and freed up the system from the standpoint that it allowed it to live out its creed, to make a more perfect union. So after ending segregation within the American construct, that made a more perfect union. Getting blacks the right to vote, that made a more perfect union. And so all nonviolent does, it's how do you fight for your rights without killing your enemy? Because within a democracy, we don't have to kill each other to come up with our rights. Yes, we have racism and these isms and these schisms and militarism and classism, but it takes a person who has to see past all of that to know that you still have value in spite of your isms, that we can come and reason together and then forge a policy in each person's interest, that no one can be left behind when we're working in each person's interest. And that's what a democracy is. We may not always agree, but we can agree to disagree without killing each other. And when that doesn't happen, Houston, we got a problem. And the part of the problem is that character development is not part of our infrastructure, and nonviolence is not part of our academic diet. And without these two dynamics, Houston, we're gonna have a problem. And so the 8 steps to nonviolence is just that. It's making an observation. It's asking questions, doing an investigation. It's checking your motive why you want to solve it. And then through that apparatus, you get the insight, the intellect, and will to come up with a rational recommendation that works in everyone's constitutional interest. But if you didn't see it and just heard gossip and rumors about it, and you got hurt feelings about past incidents that you didn't resolve, and if you don't ask a series of questions, you start making out allegations and rumors yourself and charges, and then you get afraid, hateful, fearful, contemptuous, and then your best recommendation is worse than the problem we had in the first place. Because that's where all those problems come from. People who won't admit what they see, people who didn't ask any scientific questions, and people who have not got past their hurt feelings are now acting out in the public after doing this in the private. And so nonviolence does address two dynamics. It addresses your private life, but it also addresses your social public discord. It works in both dynamics, and that's the good thing about it. It's a way of life. It's a way to bring civility to the situation. You can always ask people, can you verify what did you see? And only through dialogue, debate, and discussion, which is the democratic process, can we arrive at a truth. But if you don't start with the first point of reference of what did you see, so that we could then dialogue, debate, and discuss how to implement or take away or add, we're not even talking about anything, and that's the problem. We are living through chaotic times because we are living through two other dynamics that have taken away from any scientific process. One, within the African American community and many other communities of religious and or cultural or racial, there's a thing called a no snitch clause. There's a no snitch clause on when we see criminal behavior amongst our own ranks. We don't agree to participate in the correction process, and so we don't tell on ourselves in our own criminal behavior, which either cocoons, breeds, manifests in other forms. But you can't stop it if you can't say you saw it. But then in the law enforcement arena, we have another dynamic called the code of silence, where there are law enforcement officers who have taken a oath to enforce the law, but yet when they see their own peers within their own ranks break the law, they themselves do not uphold their own oath in creed. And they call it a code of silence, some type of brotherhood. However, it then saturates into distrust amongst the citizen, lack of doing your job adequately to prosecute those you need to versus prosecuting those who are falsely arresting those who have not committed a crime. Because when you live in a lie and being unlawful, you can't discriminate. That's how you know everybody has a character problem, because they have no ability to actually discriminate truth from falsehood. They're not in the real life situation. Seem like they always afraid. The policeman is always afraid himself. The citizen is afraid. And so, with this much fear, what you fear will fall upon you. So, it's almost we predetermine the outcome because we always fear the outcome. So, we have to then look at nonviolence as a corrective tool. I have many recommendations that I can give to the mayor, Lori Lightfoot, of which I met her on the campaign trail, that could be a great tool for her as she deals with violence prevention citywide, as she's dealing with character development within the schools, as she's dealing with training scientific citizenship amongst the black clubs in the local community leaders, so that we are really do understand that violence is not an option to lead us into our future. I don't care who you think you are. Violence is not the option to lead us into our future, no matter who you think you are. And that's the city we have to resurrect. That's the message we have to start to replicate. But when we look at the whole steps of nonviolence, it's 8 steps. I call it the logic model. I myself was taught this by my teacher, James Bevel, who was also taught by James Lawson, who was also taught by Dr. King,
in 800 feet,
and who's
turn
also
right
taught
onto South Wolcott Avenue.
and who's also taught by Tolstoy, who was also taught by Gandhi, who was also taught by Jesus Christ, which was the teachings of nonviolence came from. And so it's looking at things for what they are, but then asking serious questions to really verify what that is. What's the history of what I'm seeing? Yeah, I see what I see, but what's the history of what I'm seeing? What's the laws that govern what I'm seeing? What's the science of correcting what I'm seeing? What is that? Where is this? And then, what is my motive for wanting to solve the problem? What is my true motive? And so, let me have a
Proceed to the root.
genuine motive for solving it myself. And then, what would I recommend if asked? And that's the thing. When you look at when they do the citizen on the street and the average citizen, and they ask them, "What would you do?" Many times have not thought it all the way through, and sometimes many have. It never surprised me where the answer comes from. Who you least expect sometimes have a greater insight to the problem of who've been paid to come up with the answer. And generally, those who've been paid to come up with the answer have very few answers. And Miss Jones, the lady who just got the garden on this corner, who's been on the block for 30 years, got more insight in helping everybody than the commissioner of public safety. It's like, well, how could this be? Well, because it's a purification process. What's really your motivation for solving the problem? Because those are where the real answers come from, and those are the real solutions come from. And if we listen close enough to the average citizen that is doing the right thing the right way for the right reason, they too know how to get the right result. But if you're not doing the right thing the right way for the right reason, you're not going to get the right result. And so purification is just that process. Is looking at your whole apparatus yourself. Why you want to solve the problem? You just trying to run black folks out the neighborhood and bring some other folks in and call that heaven? Well, is that correct motivation? You want to just run white folks out and bring white and call that Harlem? Well, what's your motivation? Or are we really trying to understand the constitutionality of things, the rights of man, the rights of the citizen, the rights of the taxpayer, the rights of freedom, the rights of liberty? Are we explaining this right? Do we understand what this means? Because when you don't understand it, you wind up losing liberty through crime. You lose freedom. You lose everything you thought you wanted because you're not making coherent social and personal observation, which means we end up going to a slavery of such because what slave would tell on the slave master? It was a code of silence, no snitch clause. In the Holocaust, when did we know they was killing that many Jews? There was a code of silence, no snitch clause. And at every turn, child abuse, a code of silence, no snitch clause. Whenever horrendous problems go on, there's a code of silence and a no snitch clause that's driving it. And the first thing we have to do to stop any syndrome, any violence, And stopping us from being victims is to make an observation. And that's one of your rights as a citizen. That's the freedom you have with freedom. And yeah, and the city need to come up with better ways to protect witnesses, witness protection programs, value what the witness did say, stop double questioning the witness, value being a witness, and see how the democratic process work when citizens participate in fighting crime, drugs, disease, poverty. It's just a matter of all of us start to make personal observations and social observations. And it's time for us to start asking more questions and not just blurting out our anger and being mad with Trump. No, start asking a series of questions with answers attached to it. And then check your motive why you really want to solve the problem and start making scientific recommendations and stand on these recommendations till your congressman, senator, alderman can agree that you are making a point that merit being heard. Listen, we always run our time so fast. Mr. Max will not be on next week. I will be back next week, but between now and next week, use your common sense.